Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here today. Today is the joint meeting between the City Council and the Planning Commission. Special meeting agenda for January 24th, 2023. And if we can have a roll call, please.
Councilmember Roth,
Present.
Councilmember Mann,
Present.
Councilmember Soto,
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Samra,
Present.
Mayor Moran,
Present.
Planning Commissioners, Chair Wallace,
Present.
Vice Chair Bassi,
Present.
Planning Commissioner Mendalca,
Present.
Planning Commissioner Baines,
Present.
Planning Commissioner Fuentes,
Present.
Next, if we can all stand up and for the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready, begin. If you can remain standing for another moment for our first responders and military members. Thank you. Council, are there any changes to the agenda? Seeing none. Citizen comments. At a special meeting, members of the public wishing to address the council for any matter on the agenda may do so at this time. Under the provision of the California Government Code, the City Council is prohibited from discussing or taking action on any item not on the agenda. Comments are normally limited to 3 minutes. Are there any public comments on the phone? Any public comments in the chambers? Can you please come up to the mic?
Good evening, everyone. Council members, Mayor, Planning Commission. My name is Nicholas Gomes. I am the field rep for Congressman John Duarte, newly hired and newly sworn in John Duarte. To give you a background, I was with Congressman Jim Costa representing Merced County for about the last 3.5 years, mostly on the west side of the county. It is now my responsibility to be out here helping serve the citizens of Livingston and the surrounding areas around Merced and Atwater. So I'll have most of the county under my purview and helping represent the congressman out here. It was my opportunity today to come before you, introduce myself, and I'm sure I will be in touch with city staff and with leadership here today, just to make sure that whatever is needed from the congressman, we can help represent the constituents in Livingston and make it a good partnership. So I will be in touch. We're still getting everything set up. We're still trying to get an office set up so that constituents can come in. I can help do casework. I can have the technology. I don't have the email or the phone yet, but I did want to come in and speak. But I will make myself available if anyone needs help. I'm going to step away and let the Planning Commission do their job tonight, but I just wanted to come forward and introduce myself and make sure everyone knew the congressman is here. We are very happy to be here in the district, and I did want to thank Mayor Moran for coming out to Planada the other last weekend or 2 weekends ago to help survey and help with some of the relief efforts. So that was very appreciative for all of the people in the district. And again, thank you very much. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy. But in the meantime, I'll be happy to let the city do its business tonight.
Are there any questions from the council this time? Any questions from the public?
Again, I look forward to working with each and all of you and again, helping represent the constituents of Livingston and Merced County. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other public comments in the chambers?
Yeah, I'm Gerardo Aguilar, a resident of Livingston. I just want to ask the general plan consultants, have you ever had any direct communication with any of these city council members? concerning the general plan update. Have any of you spoken to Rodrigo Espinoza regarding the general plan update? The reason I'm asking this because the grand jury has previously found that Councilmember Gurpal Sambra and Rodrigo Espinoza committed corruption as far back as 2016, with Rodrigo Espinoza buying properties in the redevelopment zone while he was in the council. Also, the director of the redevelopment committee, he was forced to resign. That's my question. And everything is, it's all in the report. It's in the Merced County Grand Jury report. So that's my question. That's all. Thank you.
Any other public comment in the chambers?
Hello, city staff, city council, planning commission, city manager. I also question whether or not these people that are working on the general plan have had any communication. And the reason that I ask is because also on the grand jury, it was noted that Councilmember Espinoza coerced community development director, this is verbatim, Donna Kenny to approve the building worksheet for a front patio structure at 2005 Park Street, despite the fact that Ms. Kinney told Councilmember Espinoza that she could not sign the document because the front patio constituted a non-conforming structure. It also reports here in the grand jury investigation that former Mayor Samra coerced city staff to provide the owner of 2740 Colleen Court with preferential treatment with regard to helping the owner turn an unlawfully built patio cover into a lawfully built patio cover so that the owner's bank would approve refinancing the house. So we have a lot of questions. There's another one here. Councilmember Espinoza coerced city staff to delay normal abatement procedures with regard to rubbish and non-operational vehicles at 2741 Colleen Court. We're concerned that there's people in this city government that are doing business for themselves and not for the general public. And that's what is noted in the grand jury investigation. So we're very concerned that the city government of Livingston is doing business for itself, for the people that are in government and not for the general public. So we'd like to have those answers, have these consultants communicated directly with the city government here. That's our question. Thank you.
Any more public comment on the chambers?
Yes, thank you, Rodrigo Espinoza. I was a council member for 8 years and a mayor for 6 years. And I know some citizens are upset that there are marijuana dispensaries and that the former mayor, which was cousin of Gerardo, allowed him to use the wastewater treatment plant, which is a state plant, approved by the plant. And he just, when I came in here, he told me if I was gonna call the cops on him. I didn't know he was out there when, yes, I called the police chief because, for the fear of public health, the mayor had them test inside, their ATVs inside a wastewater treatment plant, which is a state facility permitted for use for the city. And so there's angry people that didn't get their permits through the city, trying to use the past council that were almost recalled. And so they're trying to revive a grand jury investigation, which the past council tried to made up on me, and obviously the council and the attorney back then found no issues in the grand jury report. So just stating that for my defense. There's a lot of angry people, of course, and I just had to state that for the record. Thank you.
Is there any additional comments in the chambers? Seeing none, we'll move on with the item on the agenda, which is the Joint City Council and Planning Commission General Plan Update Meeting, which is an overview of the general plan update process, a summary of work completed to date, and a discussion on the next steps, presented by Jim Harnish and Michael Gibbons on Mintier Harnish Consulting Firm and Steve Maxey of J.B. Anderson Land Use Planning.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, and Chair of the Planning Commission and Planning Commissioners. My name is Jim Harnish. I'm the principal and owner of Minter Harnish, and I'm going to, and this is my colleague, Michael Gibbons, a project manager for this project, and he and I are going to make a presentation. If you have questions along the way, feel free to stop us. We'll keep going as long as you haven't stopped us, but then at the end we'll have a Q&A as long on any of the issues that you're interested in discussing. So here's an overview of our presentation. We're going to talk about who's on our consultant team, the purpose, and this is a kind of a general plan 101. We'll talk about general plan and why we're doing it and what the requirements are. And I'll hand the presentation over to Michael, who will talk about this project itself and the schedule, talk about what we've completed so far and what the next steps are, and then we'll have a discussion and question and answers. So the consultant team, Minter Harnish is leading the effort. We have two other firms that are working with us. GHD, which is a transportation consulting firm, is responsible for addressing transportation and traffic issues. And then Rincon Consultants is our environmental consultant, and they're primarily responsible for preparing the EIR that will come a little bit later in the project. So Minter Harnish has been in business in California for 38 years. My former, now retired partner, Larry Minter, and I started the firm in 1985. Our focus was primarily on city and county land use planning. And one of the things that got me interested in planning in the beginning was community engagement, doing community workshops. We've prepared over 60 general plans, 80 housing elements, and zoning codes, a number of which have been here in the Valley. Almost all of our clients are local government, city and county. Actually, all of our clients are local government. Occasionally, we'll work for regional agencies, but all public agencies are our clients. We have extensive familiarity with this area of the Valley. We work up and down the Valley, but we did in the past assist the county in preparing the general plan update in 2014, and then subsequently their zoning code. So we worked with the county on that, and then we've worked with other cities and counties in the region. We worked on the San Joaquin County blueprint and green print, and so we're dealing with issues throughout the San Joaquin Valley, which is unique in our experience in terms of regions of the state. So what are general plans? They're also known probably in all the other states of the union as comprehensive plans, but they are required by state law for every city and county. This law has been in place since the late 1960s. It's changed over time, and we'll talk a little bit about the recent changes that we're addressing right now. I think the general plan is one opportunity for cities and counties to deal with this broad range of issues altogether: land use, housing, transportation, environmental quality, environmental justice, sustainability. We deal with all of these issues at once as a part of the general plan. And it's really the only time that city and county the decision makers and the community come together to talk about a vision for the future and how you're going to get there. The general plan guides long-term decisions. All your subsequent plans and programs need to be consistent with the general plan. So any master plans that you do for infrastructure, any transportation plans, zoning code, all those things have to be consistent with the general plan. So it's a representation of the community expectations and ideas about what the community, represented by the elected officials, see as the future for the city. And the plan is organized in chapters. We call them elements. I'm not quite sure where that word came from. I should figure it out sometime. But and we'll talk. Let me go to the next slide here. I'll talk about elements in a second. So Michael and I were talking about this graphic on the way down. That originally, when Larry and I put this graphic together many years ago, it was the other way around. So provided the general plan was kind of the basis for all the other planning-related decisions that the city makes. So the zoning subdivision regulations come after the general plan or consistent with the general plan, and of course building permits follow that. So the general plan is longer term, more general, word implies, and then your other regulatory structures are shorter term and much more detailed. So here's another graphic that just shows the sequence and relationship between general plan, zoning, subdivision, and then the building permits. So what's required in a general plan? These are the basic topics that have to be addressed: land use, circulation, housing, conservation, open space, safety, noise, environmental justice, and air quality. Air quality is required only for the jurisdictions within the San Joaquin Valley. Environmental justice is really only required for cities and counties that have disadvantaged and communities that are defined by the state through several mechanisms. Whether there are disadvantaged communities in the city or county or not, we advise our clients to address environmental justice in any event. So this is the basis for the general plan, the basic requirements. The cities have the option of adding any other topics you want to the general plan. So some communities put parks and recreation elements, some childcare elements. Healthy communities is a common one. Climate change elements are in some. So you have a choice of adding all sorts of optional elements. Economic development, I guess, is a common one too. The catch is that once you add it has to be consistent with all the rest of the general plan. It has to be internally consistent, and once you adopt it, then you are obligated to implement that new topic. So new state requirements, there's just a short list, but these are driving some changes in general plan: environmental justice, tribal consultation. Complete streets is a really important one that's been around for a few years, and so forth. In some areas, Livingston doesn't really fall into this area as much as others, but wildfire and flooding issues are really big in some parts of the state, and so the general plan is really robust discussion and policies and programs related to that. So the housing element is part of one of the general plan elements. It's unique and different than all the other elements in that it has state mandated requirements and the state mandated timing for updating. They have to be updated every 8 years on a separate cycle. There are very specific requirements in the housing elements. Particularly this 6th cycle has been a huge challenge for cities and counties to comply with. The San Joaquin Valley, the state housing community development divides the state up into, identifies regions that prepare their housing elements over a course of like a 4-year period. So San Diego County jurisdiction started their housing elements like 3 or 4 years ago. They're all done. SCAG region trying to get done. ABAG is in the middle of getting done. And then San Joaquin Valley is just starting. Now, most of our San Joaquin Valley housing elements are just starting up in the last 2 or 3 months. So it's unusual that the housing element is syncing up with your general plan update. It provides some opportunities that you don't otherwise have to kind of make sure that the rest of your general plan is in sync with the housing element and vice versa. In the case of Merced County and the cities in the county, a decision is collectively made through MCAG to do this multi-jurisdictional housing element. We happen to be on the team that's doing this. Rincon, our environmental consultant, is actually the lead consultant preparing the multi-jurisdictional housing element. And so there's an added advantage to the city of Livingston that we have, are working along on that and can make sure that there's a good consistency and synchronicity between the two efforts. So that's just starting up. We just had a kickoff meeting earlier this week. President Miguel was on the call, and so we're moving along on that. The multi-jurisdictional housing element probably is going to come to you for adoption before the general plan is ready for adoption, but we don't know yet. We'll see how these sync up, but it's probably going to come a little bit earlier than the rest of the general plan, but we can work with that as these things unfold and we see how the schedules go on it. So housing elements, they are controversial. This six-cycle housing element is way more challenging than all the other housing elements that we've worked on. The new state requirements are daunting. The housing HCD has to review and certify the housing elements, and their reviews have been mind-numbing. Regardless of doing how many elements that we've done, an element that we submit for their review almost always gets 10 to 20 pages of comments. So we have to go through and revise it, and it's amazing the detail that we have to go into. So don't be surprised when it shows up in a few months. But the housing element looks at assessment of both current and future housing needs, identifies opportunities and constraints for housing production, establishes goals, policies, and programs to meet the housing needs, and then and those policies and programs have to be updated also to meet state law. Just to remind you, and you already know this, the city does not build housing, but the state's focus on local government's role in housing is increasingly significant, I guess, without having a value-laden word put on that. The state sees the cities as and counties as having the opportunity to increase housing production and housing affordability by removing obstacles to housing development. So more by-right housing, fewer conditions placed on housing, more incentives to get housing, density bonuses, that kind of thing. So big focus on how you can, for lack of a better word, get out of the way of housing developers. That's the state's view. And so the housing element's going to reflect that approach a little bit. I'm going to hand this over to Michael, but any questions yet on the kind of the overview of what the general plan's about? Don't get me started on housing.
If I may, just real quick, if anybody has any questions, please remember to state your name and if you are a commissioner. That way people watching either right now live or later, they know who it is that is either answering the questions or asking the questions. We really appreciate it. So, or the same, if it's in the public, then you're more than welcome to come up to the podium as well.
Thank you. So the next portion of this presentation is really going to be centered around this particular project, the work that we've done so far, and the work that's left. So believe it or not, this project actually started almost 2 years to the day. The contract was executed on January 22nd of 2020, and we made some fairly decent progress, and then subsequently the project was put on hold, and now we're restarting it. But the city put what's called the request for proposals out for this project, and it being a comprehensive general plan update. And the focus of the project was multifaceted. So first, it was to produce a plan that's both innovative and contemporary. So the existing general plan was adopted in 1999. It is the plan that is still used by the city. And since 1999, we know that the world is a little bit different. Livingston is a little bit different. Community has shifted, and so has state laws, which is another reason why the general plan is being updated. So Jim had touched on some new state laws that have come down. It seems like every year we're having to interpret new state law and find a way to assist cities and counties in implementing those. Kind of the larger topics of being climate change, environmental justice, and looking at hazards. And so when we look specifically for environmental justice, I know Jim had touched on it earlier, the state requires cities and counties to analyze various census tracts within their jurisdiction and look at a host of metrics to see if there is a disproportionate burden placed on certain census tracts, those being poverty, linguistic isolation. And so as part of this project, we were conducting an environmental justice analysis of Livingston. Also hazards. The state has required much more in-depth analysis on evacuation routes and looking at both flood hazards and fire hazards. And so this general plan update was really also going to be centered around implementing current best standards and also state law mandates. Diversity and inclusivity as well, that really ties back to environmental justice. Community outreach was a large portion and was emphasized at the outset of this project, and we've structured this project in our scope of work to really capitalize on that. And then emerging trends. As I had mentioned, we're not in 1999 anymore, so economic shifts. If we look back at just shopping trends in general, if we would have thought that majority of shopping is done online now, a couple of years back, I don't think people would have really believed that. And so it's finding and it's creating goals, policies, and programs in your general plan to help kind of usher in this kind of new year. Additionally, the general plan was centered around smart growth. So that was really leaning into determining priority areas for development and also developing goals and policies that would focus on accommodating growth through infill and strategic planning annexations. Additionally, land use was another focus, so evaluating vacant and underutilized land and looking at policies for growth and for alternatives in land uses. And then economic stability and vitality, of course, looking at downtown preservation, working with the greater Merced County and other local jurisdictions to see if there's cross-cutting topics that the general plan could involve, and then economic development plan implementation. So the project has a total of 8 phases. We are currently on phase 5, which means that we've already started the project. That project initiation was in spring of 2020, and that started with a city tour and a kickoff meeting. So we sat in this very room, spoke with the council and the commission at that time, and picked their brain as to what they felt the general plan should focus on. We opened that up for public comment and received a lot of great feedback. That meeting really pushed us and propelled us into starting to prepare the plan, in which we got into phase 2, which was we developed project branding, conducted a series of stakeholder interviews, and then held a general plan forum. We have also prepared an existing conditions and trends workbook, which I'll touch on in a little bit later in this presentation, but that would be phase 3. It's really just a report, a comprehensive report of the city. And then we did community and guiding principles, and this was, phase 4 was where we had left off before the project was put on hold. So that included a joint study session, an open house, and then multiple newsletters. The project, so I'll say the community and guiding principles, actually the community had adopted community and guiding community vision and guiding principles in June of 2021, and I'll show those on the screen in just a moment. But where we left off was this evaluating alternatives phase, and that's where we look at various land use concepts, growth concepts, development concepts, some being looking at potential annexations, some being infill. The important part of the alternatives process, though, is to emphasize that it's just theoretical, it's hypothetical. We're looking at potential development within the next 20 to 30 years, and so there's a lot of, it's just kind of a math game. From that alternatives phase, once an alternative would be selected, that would really kind of push us forward and propel us through the rest of the plan. But we never really got to that point yet. We worked initially with city staff to develop some preliminary alternatives, and then the project was put on hold. But if we look to the remaining phases, we have phase 6, which is actually preparing the general plan, and this is where we start drafting and updating those various elements that Jim was touching on earlier. So land use, circulation. This is where we would include the newer elements like the environmental justice element as well. That, at least initially, we were anticipating a 6 to 8 month to complete all those elements. It's important to note that when the city initially had started this project, it was envisioned that this new general plan would be a kind of a wholesale rewrite of the 1909 general plan. So as part of that process, we conducted what's called a general plan audit, where we took every goal, policy, and implementation program. At the time, the contract planner with the city, we worked alongside them and went through each of those goals, policies, and programs to make sure that they were still reflective of community values. And then after we prepare our general plan, we move into the environmental review process. That would be handled by our subconsultant, Rincon, and hopefully, at the end of that, after a successful environmental review, we hope for a successful adoption, which would be phase 8. So I touched on some of these, but I'll just go through some of the work that we've completed so far. It has been quite some time since we've been in front of you all again. So I'll start from the beginning. At the outset of the project, we created project branding. This was the logo that was selected and was designed for this particular project. We choose logos to create transparency and also to create visual interest, and it allows the general public to, it creates a recognizable image for the general public to follow along with. We also have a project website, and that's Livingston City 2040. I would highly recommend everyone to check out the website if you have not. This is really the hub for the project. This is where we post our documents. This is where you can submit comments, sign up for our newsletter. This is where we post events that are coming up, workshops, and where we also report out on the status of the project. All of the documents that I will touch on next are up on that website, so if you would like to see the documents and deliverables that have been prepared thus far, they all are on the website for access. As part of our website, we also have interactive community engagement. Part of this, as I had touched on earlier, community engagement was a large portion of this project. So having tools that would allow easy accessibility for all members of the public. We have the ability to do full translation on our website. Right now it's available to be translated in both Punjabi and in Spanish. And then all of our materials that we post are also fully translatable as well. One of the things that I really think that sets Minter Harnish apart is our continued engagement and outreach. So we, as part of this project, are also have been scoped to put out periodic newsletters and updates. Those are sent out via our email contact list, so if you had signed in this evening, you will likely receive a newsletter at some point down the road. But this gives the general public project update and project status. A lot of this are also posted on our website, but have gone out through our mailer lists as well. And then mapping. So this is a large portion of this project is compiling mapping information and data and presenting in a way that makes sense. Being that the general plan hasn't been updated since 1999, there was a lot of mapping that, as one would assume, not necessarily the most accurate. So compiling a database that is accurate and currently that reflects what's currently on the ground is extremely important. It sets the foundation for the rest of the general plan. So we have prepared, this is just an example of one of the maps just showing the boundaries, but this is kind of the template and the style that we've picked. Our maps will then be used for across all the elements. So specifically, I'm thinking of the circulation element, which is a really important one, which also has its own element. GHD is our sub-consultant on that. And then the existing conditions and trends workbook. So the existing conditions and trend workbook is really a snapshot in time. We completed this in 2020 in September, and it evaluates a multitude of topics in the city. So we look at public utilities, land use, economics, job, population growth. We had a preliminary analysis on environmental justice. It looks at what kind of trends exist in this city and what can we reasonably expect in the future. And it sets the baseline conditions on the ground today. This existing conditions and trend workbook would then be used to inform the rest of the general plan and more specifically the environmental review phase. And then we crafted a vision and guiding principles for this project as well. And so the vision is really a statement that is inspirational and sets the key values and aspirations for the general plan, whereas the guiding principles are more the fundamental kind of doctrine that are used to guide development of the goals and policies. So in June of 2021, we had an adopted vision statement. I won't read it for you, but I'll leave it up for just a moment. And then with that vision statement, we also have 5 guiding principles. And so number 1 was to cultivate a downtown renaissance, balance growth and agricultural land preservation, offer recreational opportunities, foster economic growth, and maintain multicultural assets. And then community workshops. So transparency is a large portion of this project, and also creating goals and vision that is representative of the community. We can as consultants, we can understand your community on a data level. We can pop open census information, but what really matters is actually getting out and talking with members of the public and hearing their lived experiences, identifying what people's assets, issues, and opportunities are beyond what a computer screen shows. And the one way that the true way to really get that information is to go out into the public. So we have a multitude of different ways that we engage. We have virtual exercises, in-person workshops, study sessions, online surveys, physical surveys. We've done a lot of engagement thus far. There's a lot more to come as we continue with this plan. But the real hub for that is also going to be on our website, where we will post about that. And translation services is also part of our scope of work as well. So Having a Spanish translation and Punjabi translation for outreach materials is also something that we are scoped to prepare. And if you go back to our previously prepared documents, we do have fully translated versions of everything thus far, and we will continue to do so throughout the remainder of the project. So next steps, this is the first step. So we are kicking off this update again after it's been on hold. And we are at phase 5 where we left off, where we had an initial preliminary discussion with city staff on potential growth alternatives. Those were never finalized, those were never daylighted. And now that we have a new council, some new council members, and new planning commission members, and the project has been on hold for so long, it's important that we kind of restart that process and get community feedback and see where we should start from. Then,
Question? A question, why was the project on hold? Who put it on hold and why? What was the rationale you received?
It was initially part of the change in staff because the staff that was providing us direction left, and there was nobody to really guide the consultants. So we decided to just wait until the council was established and the new staff was on board so that we could get, we have to depend on staff to get a lot of daily, weekly directions. So that was the reason. So now that new staff is here, council in place, commission in place, we're ready to get going again.
Sorry, was there a lack of staff or council or planning commission at that time? Or was it just more of a personality thing? Because I think we've been fully staffed.
Well, the city manager and the contract planner both left, and you've just recently replaced the city manager and the contract planner. We had discussions with the first city manager replacement, but they still needed to get staff on board and the council set. So it was a combination of things.
And that was your decision or the council or both?
It was a staff direction. It was not, we don't make those decisions.
Staff direction, thank you.
Any other questions? At any time, feel free to answer questions or ask questions.
so yeah, we stopped at phase 5, and that's where we remain. And so we are very much at the beginning of the alternatives process. This is where, as I had touched on earlier, we look at various alternatives for growth or non-growth. We analyze what are the existing development standards, those specifically being dwelling units per acre, so how dense your neighborhoods are, and then FAR, which is your floor area ratio. That is, if you had to think about how intense commercial areas are, your metric for that would be floor area ratio. And so we develop a series of alternatives. We do a geoanalysis to see, and we take into consideration a lot of assumptions on development, and we come up with hypothetical growth alternatives. The way that would then work is the council and commission would select a preferred alternative that the general plan would proceed forward with and base the rest of the analysis off of. And then after phase 5, as previously mentioned, we would prepare your various elements, have engagement throughout that phase, and then have a successful adoption in phase 8 after an environmental review, which at this point we're looking at about a year for that. Environmental review has been taking longer with new state laws and the analysis that is required as part of CEQA. So it's not uncommon to see that 1-year mark being pushed further out these days. But that is where we're really going to ensure having a robust environmental review is where you're really going to ensure that your plan is defensible, that is really addressing all the state mandates.
Yes, so you can come up, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members and commissioners, Chair Commissioner. My name is David Storer. I retired from PERS in December, having 30-odd years in the planning field. The reason I'm here tonight is I represent clients in and around Livingston. It's great to hear that the process has been reignited. I just want to give you my experience because there's a train wreck coming to Livingston and the Central Valley in the terms of RENA. And Jim mentioned it, your regional housing needs analysis. Having just retired from 4 years in the city of Sonoma, we just went through the 6th cycle and received a humongous RENA for that small community of 10,000 people. Our 5th cycle RENA was 137 units. 330 was the new number. So if you can just compare apples to apples, you're going to be having a large number coming your way to find for housing in the city limits of the city of Livingston. So be prepared for that. There's a statewide, the governor has made it patently clear that he expects to see a lot of building of housing throughout the communities of California. A good thing. So I just wanted to kind of give that, Jim can speak more at it, and you don't have to take my word for it, but that's a big issue. Train wreck is probably not the best word, but it's a thing that you haven't dealt with at that magnitude before, and it may come as a shock to you. So more of a comment, not so much of a question. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions at this time? So, Mayor?
Well, I'll go on. What's the planning commission has any questions that way?
Yeah, so this is anyone, because I've seen some of you guys taking a lot of notes, so I'm sure you got some questions in there. So just remember to state your name, please. Thanks.
Planning Commission. Under your vision statement, you're saying trendy restaurants. You don't consider Applebee's trendy, do you? Or are you thinking Ruth Chris is coming here?
Well, I don't know who that words actually are. I mean, these aren't, we wrote these words, but at the direction of the community input and commission and council. So I don't know where the word trendy came from. But somebody in all of the input that we got said, I want trendy restaurants in Livingston, and so we put it in. It's not our idea, it's an idea that came from someplace else.
You.
It's not a bad idea, but getting to your specific question, no, I don't consider Applebee's trendy.
Yeah.
So, whether it matters or not.
Well, Applebee's is a good place.
It is.
If you can't afford much. According to that song, remember that country song? Where that guy takes his wife to Applebee's because that's all he can afford.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
but anyway, I have a question through the chair, of course. Can we go to the boundaries map, please?
The boundary map? Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Let me zoom in. Oh, actually, I have a larger one. Give me one moment.
Thank you. You had it right there. The question is, I know this is a bit early and we'll address it. I noticed the planning area is going towards Campbell, but not quite into the Sultana overpass. You know, one of the items I believe we're going to end up having to do is our traffic circulations plans and all that. By not going exactly to Sultana, are we taking that interchange out of our traffic plan? Or does that matter at this point, or is that too early? Because it seems like it's just a little too early. Yeah. Otherwise, we have to put a lot more into Hammett and Witten Way, but will that make a difference at all? I know it's just a planning area, I understand that, but.
It's just we work with the city staff to kind of say, what's the largest area we want to kind of look at for consideration for, it's primarily focused on land use.
I get
issues. It does not exclude addressing the interchange and the circulation element or in our analysis. Certainly have to be addressed in the EIR.
Yeah, the question out is if this is what we consider to be our planning area, are we going to be addressing anything outside of that at all? And if we are, shouldn't we take that into an account?
You should take it into account. When, for example, we work on this alternatives analysis, we won't look at land use alternatives that fall outside that boundary. So
Yeah.
it circumscribes the area that we're studying. The land use alternatives may not even extend out to the planning boundary. In fact, I suspect they won't, because Livingston probably doesn't need anywhere near that much ground to grow over the next 20 years. So, but we'll find out. I mean, that's all in
Yeah,
Michael's set of numbers.
I don't expect to have the answer tonight, or I don't expect, but it's just a question is, because that interchange is going to be quite a bit as far as having to affect our circulation. Because if you look at the growth's going to go towards that way anyway, to some degree. We get along 99 for commercial or what have you, but so let's just down the road if you guys can, okay?
Okay. Yep.
Actually, if you can stay on that map as well. One question that comes up is, and can you explain for people watching that have not participated yet, how we got to that particular area within that is assigned as planning area? Why more to the north, or to the east part of northeast part of the freeway, and not the other way? It's just so that we can have a better understanding of why that specific side of town was selected, and then also probably for engineering, because we also have to think about infrastructure as far as water and water wells and stuff like that. If you can add some input in regards to that afterwards.
Yeah, establishing a planning area is kind of, it's something we do very early in the process. So when, for example, we collect information on the existing conditions and trends workbook that we prepared, it focused on didn't go beyond the planning area in general. There are things that fall outside the planning area that would be just, say, Highway 99. Highway 99 is more than just what's in the planning area, so there would be a broader discussion of that. But this tends to, and the planning area was essentially settled in a discussion between the consultant team and the city staff at the time. So that's where that came from. But the bulk of that, if I recall right, the specific of the lines was really based on city staff experience with what they thought the broadest area to look at for the general plan should be. This is not inviolable. It can change. If there's direction from the staff or council that we ought to revisit this, we can do that. It might affect the accuracy of the existing conditions and trends report, because that's done. We're not going to go back and do any more work on that. But that, as Michael said, that's a snapshot in time. I don't think that's a particularly significant issue related to that decision. So the council, I mean, this would be a perfect time if the council felt like we ought to be looking at a broader area. We can do that for the alternatives analysis. We'd have to go back. We actually have to go back and kind of redo some things anyway on the alternatives analysis. So since that's our next step, if there's interest on the council's part to look at a broader area, then we better get that direction tonight.
Any questions?
Again, David Storr. Jim, it might be good to, just a comment, not a question, just to outline where the SOI is and explain what an SOI is, the sphere of influence relative to the boundary. I'm guessing it's not coterminous at this point, but maybe you can answer.
Yeah, so the sphere of influence is the blue line that's just outside the city limit.
So it's coterminous in some areas and other areas not. So can everybody see the blue line on the map?
Yeah.
And For the folks out watching live, can you explain in simpler terms what is the sphere of influence?
Sure. So your sphere of influence is it's what your city's promising really not to expand upon. It's an adopted boundary that's going beyond what your city limits is. So your city limits is your jurisdictional boundary. So the city wouldn't necessarily have jurisdiction. So anything outside that yellow boundary is going to be unincorporated county land, or it might be as part of another incorporated city. Then correct. So then that blue line would be your sphere of influence. That's kind of your promise not to develop beyond. And then we have our planning area, which is established, as Jim mentioned earlier on in the project, and helps us to come up with some sort of boundaries so we can come up with results within some sort of defined area.
Here's the blue line right here. You can see it coterminous with some areas, and then it comes in over here like that. Oh, people can hear you. Okay, so I'll point it again. Here's the sphere of influence. It's coterminous with city limits here, and then it's by itself city limits. Then it's coterminous with planning area in some cases. So just to reinforce what Michael said, the city can't develop outside this sphere of influence now. I mean, the only way you could do that is to, a pointer. Now I feel like a real teacher. Okay, everybody paying attention? So, oh no, that's old fashioned. I don't need that. No, I've got a stick. So the city can't expand beyond the blue line without getting LAFCO approval of a change in the sphere of influence. So this is, the LAFCO has also prepared a municipal services review. So this identifies the city's capacity to provide services within this area. And so you'd have to update the municipal services review in order to expand the city limits, the SOI, and prove that you can provide services beyond the existing blue line. So it's and if there was some consideration for doing that, the best time to do it is after the general plan's done, because that would provide the basis for your telling LAFCO, we need more land to grow on, and we think we can provide the services. We would address some of those issues in the EIR, so that would clear out some of those questions about whether or not the city should expand the SOI. But it's a long and involved process. And frankly, I don't remember your LAFCO here. Some LAFCOs are really tough to get SOI expansions and city expansions, others not so much. One of the issues that the LAFCO will consider is ag land and prime ag land in the vicinity, so they'll be very difficult for them to approve SOI expansion if it included prime ag land in the vicinity of the city. So there are a lot of considerations like that. That's a big policy issue for LAFCOs throughout the state, is prime ag land preservation. So any more questions while I have a stick?
Yes, so there's a question.
Mayor, I want to make a couple of comments here.
If you can say your name too also
Yeah,
for the...
John Anderson, JB Anderson Land Use Planning consulting firm working with City of Livingston. Councilmember Kripal brought up a good point. If you look at a community and you look at community constraints to development, one of the primary constraints to development in and around Livingston is safe and adequate access north and south across Highway 99. Now that Livingston has the official bypass and no longer has a stoplight on 99, we have at least three access points through the city that provide vehicular circulation north to south. Those circulation points were built by Caltrans and, in my opinion, were underbuilt. Meaning that in order to realize full development of the existing planning area, they would have to receive significant improvement, which could be an impediment to new development. It might be appropriate from a planning perspective to reach out to Sultana to help tie that together as it relates to circulation and using yet another north-south collector route to accomplish that. The problem is, of course, that we want to end up with a document, a general plan document, that is legally defensible. And we don't want to end up in a situation where it's perceived that we're gobbling up too much valuable agricultural land to achieve the city's goals and objectives as part of this entire effort. So it's kind of a balancing act. So definitely aware of where we've been, where we are now, and where we believe we need to go into the future. And we're obviously encouraged by direction that we receive from this council and from this planning commission and from the community that's here today. And this effort today is a big part of restarting and refamiliarizing ourselves with this investment that this community is making. So I want to say that. It's important. It's a very important comment about Sultana because, investment's been made at that intersection, and if we can capitalize on it to help balance our transportation needs, that's a good thing, not a bad thing. So thank you.
Thank you for that. Any additional questions or comments at this time? The council? Anybody on the phone? Anybody here in the chambers? Council?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I just got a more of, if you go back to, what slide was it? That shows our timeline. Down the road, I'll show you. Right there. I see those, we're on step 5, 3 to 4 months and all that, and this is government work and things don't always go the way we think so. What can we as a council and the city and the planning commission do to make sure that everybody remains focused in getting it done within that time frame, if not a little faster? I understand environmental reviews are mostly out of city's hands, but what else can we do to move this along?
Good question. There's some, I think there's some leeway in some of these time estimates. For example, on preparing the general plan, when we had a lag in the project, we went ahead and drafted the core of the new general plan. So we have basically took the existing adopted general plan and reformatted it and took all of the goals, policies, and programs that were still relevant and dropped them in there, and also edited those, the ones that need to be edited. So it's still waiting to add new things, but we've done a lot of work. So that may not take more than 3 or 4 months. One of the things that is uncertain about some of these steps, we never know from project to project, is how much time does it take to review? Once we get some draft work done, how much time does it take your staff to review it? And how much time does it take the commission and council to bless it and move on? So sometimes those things get strung out, and sometimes they are very efficient. So it frankly depends on how controversial issues are. The alternatives, I suspect, is going to be the flashpoint for this project. The last general plan that the city adopted was successfully litigated by the Farm Bureau. A lot of growth issues related to that. I don't think those growth issues have gone away. And so I think we'll revisit all of those this time. It may be an easier process. times have changed, people have changed, so it may be a simpler discussion, but that could string things out, or it could be pretty manageable. 3 or 4 months, I don't think it's going to be any less than that. General plan, a little bit shorter. The EIR, Michael talked about those taking longer. We could get, and sometimes, many times we do this, get the environmental consultant to start early on the project. So their work would overlap with the 7 work would overlap with 6. So they'd start before we were done with the general plan, gathering existing information, putting all the kind of the background setting information together. They need the general plan policy document to be settled in a draft form by the council, because that's the project description. So they evaluate the impacts of the plan based on what the plan says. So as long as that's still being considered by the commission and council, they can only go so far on the EIR. So we'll work with them to speed that up. But best case, 9 months.
Yeah, that's where my major concern is under the EIR. It has to go to outside agencies, and Caltrans is not known to be Speedy Gonzalez or anything like that. You know, they are, and there are others too. You know, there are other agencies it has to go to, and I believe it has to also go to LAFCO.
The EIR goes to all.
It goes to every agency.
Every agency, but they're bound to make their comments within 45 days.
You know, and one of the things I would like to see how we do this is we need to bring and make sure that the Farm Bureau is on board, that they are aware of our meetings. That way, if there's any concerns, it can be adequately addressed now and not in front of court somewhere, you know, because that's, we need to, I don't know if they were invited or not, or made aware of. I highly recommend in the future that if we have our meetings, that they be given a heads up or notice that we are going to have a meeting. That way they can attend. And there are going to be some other citizens that are more not exactly quite pro-growth. They tend to be more conservative, and we got to find out if we can identify who they are and make sure that they understand and that they are invited, so we hear from them now. And otherwise, I don't want to go through what we did last time. It's not, you know. And you're right, we're now planning to do 100,000 population. That's what it was before.
Yeah.
I think we're going to be very conservative in what we come up with and make sure that we can do within our, our time frame that we look for our general plan for the next update. So we've got to be very, very conservative and make sure that we reach out to all the stakeholders in the area and the community.
We've been in touch with the Farm Bureau, your staff's been in touch with the Farm Bureau, so they're aware of the progress that we're making. We've gotten input from them early on when we were doing stakeholder interviews. We talked to the Farm Bureau. I think they'll get most interested when we have something to come out of the alternatives process, so they can see what the growth options are. And there's no doubt in my mind that they'll weigh in detail on what they like and don't like about them. And it's on us to make sure that not only the Farm Bureau, but any other interested organizations and businesses and individuals have every opportunity to participate in the development of those alternatives and the selection by you eventually. The Planning Commission will make recommendations to the council, and then you finally on a preferred alternative, which typically is a hybrid of what, if we do 2 or 3 alternatives to provide a range of examples of what growth implications are, inward focused growth, outward focused growth, some other focus, and allow the public and the decision makers to understand what the implications of making this choice versus that choice. Eventually you get to make the choice, and but hopefully we've done our job to gather all the input so that you're informed about what the different organizations and people in the community think about the choices.
Yeah, and then another suggestion I'd like to make is everybody or every landowner that can be impacted by our decision, I'm sure we have their names and addresses on file somewhere, that they be contacted by writing, that we're going to be holding a meeting. That way, we don't want to hear that we didn't know anything about it down the road, or, so I think it is to get the folks involved. Yeah, it may be a couple of dollars worth of stamp in an envelope, but at least they can say we didn't know. I think I would highly suggest to everybody that be contacted.
In the past, well, first of all, we've developed an email contact list from the beginning of the project. So everybody, Michael mentioned it earlier, there's a sign-up sheet in the back. If you give us your email address, then you'll keep hearing from us until the project's over, whether you want to or not. So we send an e-blast out for this meeting, and we'll do it for every meeting. But we, during some portions of the project before we went on hold, we were working with staff to have inserts into your utility bills so that we would have little announcements or updates. What's the general plan doing right now? Or here's a meeting that's coming. And so we'll use that as a way too. I mean, I know not everybody reads the paper in their utility bills.
I don't.
But it's at least another avenue. You may get our emails, you may not want to read the paper, but some people do. So
Yeah, my concern is folks that are just outside of where we're at right now. They don't watch our meetings because they probably don't have cable where they can. And I can point to at least a couple of people that don't even have email, so
Yeah.
it's trying to reach out to the ones that are hardest to get, because when time comes, they're going to be the loudest.
we've also used the reader board to announce meetings. We've done that, and we're open to any other suggestions. The issue today of reaching people who aren't connected to the internet is extremely difficult. We're working in Trinity County right now that has real challenges with internet, Wi-Fi, and even cell service. And so we've been exploring different ways of reaching out to community. We've been connected with community Facebook pages, so that, that's still connected to the internet. But so any suggestions that the council or commission have for other ways of reaching out to people? We know it's important. I've never been to an important meeting where somebody hasn't showed up and said they didn't hear about it, even though they're there. So it's a common, frequent complaint. We do as much as we can, and we know how to try to reach out to people.
In defense of some of the people that didn't receive the email, I understand that some of them received it yesterday. So if we can, well, not me, but you can send out those emails way ahead of time, because I know that the general plan update meeting was on calendar for quite some time. So hearing that some people received emails just yesterday doesn't allow them to attend our meetings should they have something else in their plans.
Yeah, we wanted to send that out earlier. We just, it just didn't happen. It should have gone out earlier. Typically, when we get ready for a workshop or another event, we start advertising 5 weeks ahead of time. We put together what we call a workshop guide that includes milestones every week for outreach, notification, and working with people. So I apologize for us not getting that out sooner. That was on us. But in the future, all of your meetings, all of the workshops, we'll be starting to publicize those weeks ahead of time.
And then while we do have listed as a rough days, I like to kind of hold that a little stronger. And if we're not going to meet a particular benchmark within a certain time frame, I think council, somebody needs to be made aware, hey, here is where it's not moving forward, or here's where we're stuck, so it can be addressed. Not that day we're supposed to have discussed it, but at least have an update prior to that. It could be a simple staff communicate to the council and the planning commission, but I want to make sure that it doesn't get dropped along the way, you know.
We prepare what we call a short-term 6-month schedule for all our projects, and we program out our work and staff's review time and meetings on a weekly basis for 6 months, and then we update that every month or two. And so we know way in advance whether or not we're hitting our marks. And so we will be able to let you know if there are some issues or glitches in the process. We can provide the council and commission a copy of that 6-month schedule so you can see what our planning is. We'd be happy to do that.
Yeah, it can be simple email to the planning and the council, you know, so
Sure.
just so we're all aware of it and don't want anything to fall apart somewhere.
We haven't updated that yet. We were waiting for this meeting though, so
No
we can't
problem.
give it to you tonight, but
Actually, my email is good from years past, so you should still be working, so.
okay.
Now that we have this graph up there, in regards to step or number 5, which we're doing tonight, the open house, is that already in the schedule, in the plans?
No, it's not scheduled yet. That was, actually, this is a special session. This is not the study session that's listed up there. That's coming later. That study session we will have, I think these are out of order, because don't we have the study session after the open house? I can't remember. Anyway, that will be a study session to go over the alternatives. I can't remember what the sequence is before we have the open house, which is the big public event, to get feedback from community about it, or after it. Sometimes we do it either way. So.
Okay. We have a question.
Just a comment.
Can you state your name, please?
Yes, my name is Miguel Galvez, contract planner with J.B. Anderson. Just to drill down a little bit on the growth strategies, one thing is to talk about which area the city is interested in growing to or not growing to. But one of the things that the council can consider is, when I say growth strategies, I'm thinking about whether the city council would be interested, or the planning commission, in allowing the city to grow by neighborhoods, if you will, rather than growing all at once. It identifies neighborhoods or community development areas or specific plan areas. And that's an important tool that the city can use to really focus on a specific area. And you can look at the infrastructure, the sewer, water line, storm drainage. You can design that comprehensively, and that involves, you have the general plan, you got the zoning, but there's a step in the middle. So that's an option that some cities consider. They have these community plans or specific plans. So cities can grow, and they allow for this additional layer of review, both environmental review, but also public input. But it's a great way to really focus the city's efforts, both from city engineering, planning, rather than growing in many directions. It's just one strategy that a number of cities use. So when you consider growth strategies, this is an option the council can consider. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional questions, ideas? Yes.
Council, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So my name is Jane Okui. My address is Olive Avenue in Livingston. I'm not in the city, but and I've been here, been involved in the city council meetings for probably 15 or 20 years. And I know these people because I've been involved as general plan for the county also. And I'm also a Farm Bureau board member. We came to the council and staff here and said, make it smaller. You said you're going to have 103,000 people by 2025. We're going clear out to Cressy Way, 3 miles out. Why? Why are we going down to West Side? And then I think they, for the sphere of influence and what we have in the city limits right now, the population, if I could get a figure for that, I don't have papers with me, But if we just go with what we have right now in the sphere of influence and build it out, what would be the population in this city? We started, I think, when we were redoing the plan here, can't remember what year it was, the one that was challenged by the Farm Bureau. But I remember that there was a figure in that, you know, what it is now with a 1999 plan. But I think if we look at what we have right now, and I think the population, they said, was about 14,000 then, and by 2025, they're going to have 103,000 and put the limits way out. And there's concern about water here. So anyways, just a few things I have in my mind. And I will be involved. Thanks.
Okay, great.
Thank you. Mr. Wallace?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Bob Wallace from Planning Commission. You talked about the Farm Bureau with the new council now. I'm not sure, go back two and a half years. Has anybody from the council approached the two schools, our elementary school and the middle school? What is their potential for growth right now in those buildings? Because that's going to influence a lot of our decisions too. And then the high school belongs to Merced. So what, has anybody in the last 2.5 years contacted anybody from the districts to know the schools, fire and police, what our expectations will be versus so many people?
Thank you. Go ahead.
When we did the stakeholder interviews at the beginning of the project, we did talk to 2 or 3 school district representatives of both districts. I can't recall, it's been too long to recall exactly what they told us. There is some, I don't think there's a specific summary of what school districts said in the stakeholder interview summary, because we didn't attribute specific comments to specific people, but we did talk to them and get some input.
But that was 2 or 3 years ago, right?
Yeah, it was.
So now we need them, somebody should be talking to them before we get any much more serious on some of this.
So typically for agencies, public agencies like that, when we have a work product that we want input and review, we'll send it to them. We won't necessarily, at this point, they're on our mailing list, email list. They'll find out about all the things that we're up to. We'll send them things for comments. I don't know at this point that we have plans to sit down and talk to the school district more about their specific needs, but it's something that we could consider trying to figure out when it might be most appropriate to do that as a part of this.
Right, I remember the first meeting because I was in attendance then, but 2 or 3 years difference there's a lot of changes, and we've had, we know we've grown past the 14,241 or whatever it says, so somebody needs to be, you don't know what those people you talk to on that email list are still the right people, so somebody needs to get into that. And then you mentioned hypothetical growth. When will you come up with that? After all this is put together?
No.
Before, do you have a magic number in your mind already, or do we need a couple more sessions so you think you can give us a number that we're looking at?
I have a number, but I'm not going to tell you. No, we don't have a number.
Okay. Fair enough.
Mr. Wallace?
That comes out of the process that Michael talked about, where we work with staff to come up, make some sensible assumptions about growth choices, like should this area stay single-family residential, or can we assume some increased residential density for the remaining parcels, or what kind of growth should be occurring in the central district, the commercial area? Do we want to try to encourage mixed use and more residential uses, especially in the vicinity of the future ACE train station? So, to me, that's a big consideration for the cities. How much growth in the urban core, what kind of growth? And so we'll look to develop a sensible range of choices. It has to be realistic. We're not going to come up with some grand plans that nobody's going to
think it's possible to do.
Yeah, we want to have only the possible, and then come up with the numbers based on that. What's the capacity of that? What's a logical range? And this isn't necessarily a proposed plan. These are examples, thought out examples based on our experience and your staff's experience that represent some realistic choices that you as the decision makers can then look at the outcome and say, oh, well, this is going to result in 10,000 more, we can accommodate 10,000 more people, but we're going to have to widen these roads to 6-lane roads, and that's not going to work, so we're going to push growth someplace else. So those are the kind of things that we'll talk about.
And does the state have a deadline that it has to be done by?
None, no.
None, no.
There's no deadline for updating the general plan. Even though there are specific requirements about the contents of each of the elements in state law, they're pretty general and vague. So really, the city can put whatever it wants into the plan. Maybe one exception is the environmental justice element, because the Attorney General's office is looking over local government's shoulder on that one. They have a enforcement unit of at least 5 people that stay in touch with cities and counties that are doing environmental justice elements. They used to call me regularly on a couple of projects and see where we were. And we know that they've filed litigation in a couple of places where they've challenged the environmental justice element. So that's the only experience I've had outside the housing element where some outside agency is trying to enforce something into your, or force something into your general plan. And there's no timing required. I mean, there's some elements like the EJ element and the safety element that are triggered when you update the housing element, but there are no time frames put on the overall general plan update.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Thank you.
I have a question, because you brought up a good point, the gentleman in the back, regarding the overpasses. Who designed the overpasses, and were those designed as part of the general plan back then? Because you bring up an incredible point that they're so narrow to be able, you can't really grow a city around such a small overpass.
So again, John Anderson, JB Anderson Planning. I mean, I can speculate, and I don't want to do that. They were designed and constructed by Caltrans. Caltrans, when they typically work on a project like this, they'll take into consideration the city's currently adopted general plan and the impacts that that population would have on the infrastructure. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know what else to say beyond that. I know personally, based on some of the more recent projects that we've had, Moonglow Trucking being the most recent, that consistently Caltrans comments and discussions with staff have focused on the narrowness of those overpasses and the restrictions that it provides, not only for the existing community, but future growth within the existing community and the future. So it will, and it is and will be a limiting factor of growth for this community, and there's going to be some discussions and decisions that the council is going to have to make relative to that and how we move forward as a result of what's been left for us with Caltrans. And making adjustments to those interchanges, every year the price tag just goes up and up. I mean, some of the interchanges that I'm involved with right now up in the Manteca, Lathrop, Stockton area, I mean, these interchanges are 60, 70, 80 million dollars now. I mean, it's just insane, the amount of money and commitment that is necessary in order to fulfill some of those improvements. So, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, to put it into Caltrans in the state, I don't think they're no longer interested in capacity. They want to go HR, high-speed rail, and transit. And I think that's what they're trying to go towards. We all are familiar with the project going through Merced. I know it states, Caltrans says and state that it's going to be 6 lanes up and down. They already abandoned the capacity through Merced, because the new cost came at over $1 billion. Yeah, so good luck at Caltrans helping in any way. They're going to push more and more onto the local projects. And that's going to be very key. That's why I was very concerned about taking Sultana in, because it will only help us in the future, you know. So just, and in fact, even through Atwater, they already abandoned the 6 lanes. It'll stay the way it is. It'll go through Livingston. Our northbound lanes are already 3, and they're going to do the south because it's under already a currently funded project, but that's it. When they're done, rehab only.
Gino Cooey again. What about the ACE train? They're talking about having a stop in Livingston. Wouldn't that be
Yes.
great?
That's going to happen. I believe it's already moving forward.
Will that be Livingston and they'll have a stop in Atwater also?
No, there is no stop in
that's
Atwater.
kind of
It's
what I thought,
Livingston.
But that's something to consider. Certainly it's
It's
something to consider
Livingston
with our,
and Merced,
right.
not
Okay.
Atwater.
Because our VMT, the vehicle miles traveled by cars, will certainly be reduced if we can get people into
Yes.
the trains. Thanks.
So what, Mayor John Anderson, again, one more comment, sorry. As it relates to traffic and metrics that were required to evaluate, Jim and Michael, you might want to talk a little bit about that because, you know, in our world, it's always been, traffic's always been measured by levels of service A through F. F being the worst traffic, most delays, et cetera. And in most cases, communities still use LOS, levels of service, to evaluate traffic from an administrative standpoint and from traffic safety standpoint. But as it relates to evaluation of traffic per the California Environmental Quality Act, we're now instructed to use a thing called vehicle miles traveled, which is VMT. And there is a distinct difference. So I don't know if you guys, not to go into the weeds, but just talk a little bit about that and how that's affecting, you know, land use decisions and general plan development in the state of California. Thank you.
So John just asked me about one of my pet peeves in planning. There are many. No, they're not that many, but so vehicle miles traveled is a new way of measuring traffic, and it was originally, the concept originally came up in urban areas where there was an interest in intensifying development, but an inability to expand the roadway. So, you know, established urban areas, you're not going to expand this city street to 6 lanes. So the idea is to find a different way to analyze the traffic effects on these kinds of increasing intensity of developments, and have traffic mitigation measures be something other than widening the street, financing bike lanes, or other kind of alternative transportation modes. The issue, my problem with it, is that when this concept finally got to the legislature and was put into state law, the interpretation was that it didn't just apply to these developed urban areas, it applied to everybody, every place. So you find rural areas like Trinity County where we're working, it has to do VMP analysis. But the VMT analysis kind of focuses on, well, what are the alternative transportation modes? Bus, bicycles, ride share, all that stuff. Well, that doesn't happen in rural areas much. And it certainly doesn't happen in the San Joaquin Valley where you have a dispersed labor force, you have people working all over ag land. So bus, we know that the bus transportation services here are modest at best. So there are not a lot of ways to do alternative transportation mitigation. So in my opinion, VMT is not that useful for more rural communities, but we still have to do it. It's a CEQA tool, so the EIR will use VMT to analyze traffic impacts. It doesn't mean that your traditional level of service analysis goes away. It's just not an environmental issue, it's a policy issue. In most cities and counties we work with, keep LOS policies, which are essentially say, if a new project exceeds a certain level of service, and you've got to do transportation improvements to make sure that that new development is serviced. Put another, put a turn lane in, put the traffic signal in, put another lane, who knows what it is. But the city, when the city has LOS policy, typically your Public Works Department will identify what those traffic improvements are that would be funded if somebody triggers a need to reduce the level of service or adjust level of service related to their project. So it's a new metric. I'm not, obviously not a big fan of it. All my transportation traffic consultant friends I think it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. And it does enable more development within serviced, built-up urban areas, and so it's a good thing there, but it's a one-size-fits-all problem, I think. Is that the right answer, John?
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. I guess we're all learning. Bottom line is we're all learning. So in its application to rural areas like the Central Valley, Mariposa County, you don't have to go all the way up to Jersey, is extremely complicated. So thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I just wanted to introduce myself, Charles Jolly, the principal at Livingston High School, as part of Merced Union High School District. So the question of is the school district represented? They are. Our superintendent is on the mailing list, and I'll be adding myself. In terms of expanding growth, that is something the school district looks at every year, as we go on, are doing our own internal planning in terms of meeting the needs for classrooms or facilities or upgrades, and so looking at attendance. And just historically here in Livingston, the numbers have been pretty consistent across the board in terms of enrollment at Livingston High School. So that's how we plan as well. I don't know if that's helpful, but just we're here and we will be here.
Thank you. And I don't want to speak for the Livingston School District, but I know for the last few years, their numbers have been actually decreasing. So, or at least, I don't know within the last year, but the 3 previous years, their numbers had been decreasing, whether, was 80 to 100, 150 students per year. So I don't know what the current status is, but it's always a good idea to make sure they're at least aware of the plans and if what we have looks like it's going to work for them or not, or at least so they can at least be part of the conversation. Any other questions from the public? Anybody on the phone? Here in the chambers? Commissioners? Council? City manager? Okay.
I have one. The gentleman in the back row, I can't recall your name, but you were mentioned that REMA, I believe it is. It's a dual question. Could this affect the general plan at all?
Absolutely. David Storer. Jim and I go back more decades than I want to admit. But yeah, the RENA, Regional Housing Needs Allocation, is a number that gets given out. And I'm going to predict that it's going to be at least 1.5 times that your 5th cycle is. I don't know if, Jim, if you've seen that, but there'll be a number that you're given, and you'll need to be painting yellow on your map for residential, or at least orange if you can in some of the more dense areas, and say thank you to the state of California for that. So it's your regional housing needs allocation, and you'll be having to massage that. Did you say, Jim, that it's going to be a regional housing element that you're going to be doing?
Yeah,
so that'll need to be plugged into your land use coloring on your maps.
Yep.
Did that help?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
I want to talk more about RENA. Michael, I've asked Michael to see if he can look up what your RENA is so we can get place a number on this discussion. But just to add to what David said, the RENA starts at the state, and the state allocates it to regions, and then each region, MCAG in this case, allocated it to the cities and the county, and there was a process, a feedback loop too. So it wasn't just, here, take this. There was a back and forth at some point, probably 6 months or a year ago, to settle on what the allocation is. And most places throughout the state, the arena went way up. As David talked about, one place we're working in St. Helena, the arena went up 900%. So the valley, though, is not seeing quite the same level of increase that all the more dense urban areas had. So at least there's some, it's not as challenging. In fact, some places it actually went down in the valley. So it's not just a number, and it's the number of housing units that the city's supposed to help facilitate construction of over the next 8 years. And it's broken out into 5 different categories: very low, low, moderate, and above moderate, and something else. So it's not just houses, it's housing by income affordability type. So the biggest increase in the numbers this round have been for the very low and low, the hardest ones to provide. Okay, so we have, so Livingston arena is 1,097, almost 1,100 housing units. 311 very low, 213 low. So that's 524 units, almost half your allocation that's very low. Those almost always are subsidized housing. It's almost impossible to build for-profit housing for very low and low income meet the rental rates, and you're not going to see sales in very low and low. So, and these low income, it's described as low income units. It's based on the affordability of people within those income ranges. So the very low income person that can afford 30% of their monthly income for rent. And so it's a pretty low number. So it's really hard to hit those marks. Those are the hardest ones to hit. The market rate housing is generally moderate and above moderate, and those are just, almost all jurisdictions meet those. And the HCD doesn't care about those anyway. It's the low and very low income. So I don't know what the comparison is to your last allocation. This doesn't say what your 5th cycle was. I'm guessing it's lower, but I know it's lower.
And so very good questions. And so kind of related to that, and through MCAG and the city, we have been working already on part of the process, and Jennifer has a little bit more information.
Yeah, with the 1,079 that were allocated for the city of Livingston, we are working with local planning to allocate some of those housing units. And as of today, we do have plans to reach about 50% of that requirement, pending development progress and process. But at this time, we know of 480 specifically that are sort of slated to be brought into the city, and then another additional housing that will accommodate, getting us to about 50% of that requirement. And we are working closely with MCAG and also our planning and engineering department to ensure that the city is able to meet those requirements.
And there's one aspect that's new this year, this cycle, that wasn't around, were accessory dwelling units. The HCD is willing to consider accessory dwelling units as part of the arena. It's based largely on your track record for the last 3 years of how many ADUs have been permitted in the city. A lot of places are in the early stages of that. We've talked HCD into being more liberal about that in some cases where we can show that there's a trend. You know, it's a short-term trend, but ADUs help. But surprisingly, they don't necessarily help in the very low and low income range, because most accessory dwelling units fall into the moderate income range. Surprisingly, I've seen a couple of analyses. Some do, but most people are invest in an accessory dwelling unit are going to get as much income out of it as they can. And so they're a help for RENA, but they're not necessarily a help at that low end.
Miguel Galvez here once again. The last RENA number, or I should say the RENA number for the last cycle was 1,023, so it's gone up a little bit. Now it's 1,097.
Piece of cake.
All right. Any additional questions, comments? Anybody on the phone? Well, definitely this has been a great conversation and a great refresher. Questions?
While you're on hold from January 2020 up until now, was work being done towards this at all? Was it a complete hold?
I'm sorry.
Was the general plan, any updates or any work towards the general plan, was it completely on hold, or were you doing work towards it?
We've been completely on hold. I don't know, how long has it been, Michael? 9 months?
Yeah, almost 9-10 months.
Yeah, I mean, we continued to work, but at some point, because of the uncertainty about where the project was going, we just felt like it made sense, rather than us continuing on our own to do more work without direction from city staff. And city staff, the remaining person, Randy Hatch, who was your previous planning consultant, just before he left, basically said, yeah, I think it makes sense to go on hold until all of our replacements are on. So, yeah. So we haven't done any work. We've saved the budget.
So with that in mind, I'm looking at the general plan update impact fee and some of the expenses towards that. If you can enlighten us with those expenses during that time.
Yeah, so we did have the contract with Mintier Harnish, and we set the original encumbrance for the first phase of the work, and now any remaining funds will be used in part to fund this remaining work. We'll issue a new PO that'll reserve those dollars. There may be some funds remaining in that account, but because we know we have other work related to the elements of the general plan update, that will likely absorb those dollars, and in consideration of the limited funds that are made available through that impact fee, we will likely also have to find supplemental funding.
For their contract services?
No, for the project in total.
Okay, so under contract services, would that be the consultancy?
That's correct.
So I'm looking at expenses for, the actual expenses for 2019 through 20, 21, 22, and then just this year, 22, 23 of expenses.
Yes, so there likely were some pre-work that was done in those early years, and once the contract was had, that's the expense that you're seeing in there at this time. And then so the remaining budget that's in this fiscal year is intended to cover the remaining costs of the contract that was approved by council when it was originally approved. We can go through it. I can provide in the future meeting or to council directly details of the expenditures in that fund if you'd like.
I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
You got it.
All right. Any additional comments, any final comments, questions? And I'm sure if there's any other questions that come up, feel free to email somebody and ask those questions, and we can make sure that we can refer them to the right people. Well, thank you very much for being here and for participating, and feel free to watch this meeting video again, so just in case you missed some information. And we're going to adjourn this meeting at 7:21.